After last week, I still have remakes on the brain. Remakes. Not all bad, but largely not good, especially when it comes to foreign films. Many times, the American reproduction makes a film worse by comparison, so here are 5 such instances where you'd be better off just watching the original. Here's 5 original movies remade into worse films by Hollywood. And I apologize, I genuinely hope this doesn't come across as film snobbery. I'm just trying to let you know about some much better films that are out there. Some of these you may not even know are remakes. Shudder. Shudder is a 2004 horror film from Thailand. It's about a photographer, Tun, and his girlfriend, Jane. While driving home from a party, they accidentally run over a woman and leave her on the road to die. Tun returns to his work, but every time he develops a photo, there is this mysterious white shadow that appears in them. He also now has this horrible neck pain that won't go away, something he thinks is left over from the accident. Tun and Jane start looking into things and discover something unusual about the woman they hit. While going by the synopsis, you'd think this is something like I Know What You Did Last Summer, but aside from the accident, these two films are completely different. The movie was remade in the US as Shudder in 2008. Even though the remake was helmed by Masayuki Ochiai, who did Parasite Eve, the remake is disappointing. It's very similar to the original, only with more jump scares. The biggest change in the movie was the location. The original takes place in Thailand, while the remake takes place in Japan. Apparently, the director wanted this because it was originally supposed to take place in the US. He just felt more comfortable making this in his home country. While I give the director credit for shooting a very pretty film, it's empty. Doesn't have the tension or energy of the original. It's just a subpar copy with a really nice paint job. I don't fault the director on this one. I think he did his job, but it was just tackling something that was better left alone. It was made bland and safe for the American audience, and it shows. I think this was his first American film, too. I also wonder if the producers of this hired the director because they had the mindset of Hank Hill from the 90s.
So are you Chinese or Japanese?
Like, did they know the original was Thailand and not Japan? The movie is streaming on Apple TV and video on demand. It's not available on Blu-ray in the US, but of course, the remake is. Anyway, if you want a serious, scary film, watch the original Shudder. Louie 19, King of the Airwaves. Louie 19, King of the Airwaves is a Canadian comedy from 1994. While this is from our neighbor to the north, it's French-Canadian, so the film is in French. The movie's about a guy named Louie. He's an average guy living an average, boring life who wins a contest to be on TV. For the next 3 months, he's going to be the first 24-hour reality show. Cameramen will follow him throughout his daily life, documenting everything he does and broadcasting it live. Problem is, Louie's life is pretty boring. The producers panic and decide that in order to save the experiment, they need to start doing things to manipulate his life and make it more interesting for the audience. The movie, whether intentional or not, seems to be very similar to the 1998 film The Truman Show. The Truman Show feels like a serious version of Louie 19. Not sure if the producers saw Louie 19 or not. With reality shows on the rise in the 90s, it's very possible this was just a coincidence. Although what wasn't a coincidence was that roughly 5 years later, Louie 19 was remade in the US as EdTV. While EdTV had the larger budget, Louie 19 had the larger soul. It's funnier, and even with the subtitles, the humor translates just as well. It feels more genuine. EdTV has Matthew McConaughey as the everyman, which isn't entirely believable. He's the Hollywood version of the everyman. Meanwhile, Martin Drainville, who played Louie, is more relatable. He's just your average guy living an average, boring life, and it gets turned upside down for the sake of ratings. The movie was the highest-grossing Canadian film for 1994. It won the Claude Jutra Award for Best Feature from first-time director Michael Paulette. It's currently on YouTube in its original language, but with no subtitles. However, you guys are smart. There are plenty of places out there where you can find the English subs. I don't see it on physical media anywhere in the US. One Missed Call. One Missed Call is a 2003 Japanese satirical horror film from director Takashi Miike. It was based on the novel Chakushin Ari by Yasushi Akimoto. At the time, J-horror and Asian horror in general was blowing up. As such, there were a ton of imitators. Takashi Miike is a very talented director and always makes films in his own unique way. He's controversial, and many of his films are criticized for their insane over-the-top violence. Movies like Itchy the Killer and the Dead or Alive trilogy. However, they're films that stay with you. Movies like Audition that you can never really forget. These sorts of films are also what gained him an international following. Miike was tired of all the Asian horror films, so he wanted to do one his own way. He decided to take One Missed Call and make it a satire, poking fun at all these sorts of films. He did this in his own bizarre style, which appealed to his fans, who got what he was going for. It goofed on the whole 7 days thing popularized by Ringu. In this, you'd get a missed call from your future self at the moment of your death. This leads to some crazy moments, but the biggest is the live exorcism on TV, which of course goes horribly wrong. Miike is always working, and One Missed Call was one of the 6 films he released in 2003. In the US, magazines like Entertainment Weekly bashed the film, saying One Missed Call is so unoriginal that the movie could almost be a parody of J-horror tropes. Which is baffling because that's what it was. A parody of J-horror tropes. It also had a little bit of American tropes in there as well. The US rights were bought by Warner Brothers, and since they didn't get what the movie was either, they just remade it as a serious J-horror film. As you would suspect, it fell flat on its face. One Missed Call, the American version, came out in 2008. It's largely the same movie, only in English, and worse, it's missing the satirical bite that was in the original. The American remake was a massive flop, and it was considered one of the worst films of the year. Not that I put a lot of stock in Rotten Tomatoes, but it's one of the films that has a 0% rating on the site. The original One Missed Call is available for streaming on Screambox, and you can rent it on video on demand. Arrow released the original One Missed Call trilogy on Blu-ray back in 2020. Although parts 2 and 3 aren't directed by Miike, and play out more like traditional J-horror films. Still worth seeing, I think they're fun, but not as good as the original. Oddly enough, the original movie was remade in Japan in 2005 as a TV series. I haven't been able to find it, so I don't know if it's good or not. Really, I didn't even know it existed until this week. District B13. District B13 is a 2004 French action film from director Pierre Morel. It's about a sort of post-apocalyptic version of Paris. The suburbs have been broken into sections called districts. District B13 has been overrun with gangs and is so violent, they walled it off from the rest of the world. An undercover cop, Damien, and a guy named Lido have to infiltrate the district in order to rescue Lido's sister and stop the evil gang leader Taha, who has a missile pointed right at the heart of the city. This movie is an incredible feat. Lido is played by David Bell, the creator of parkour. The action scenes in the film are largely him running and doing some of the most insane stunts this side of Jackie Chan. It's all done with multiple camera angles, no wires, and long takes so they don't cut away from the action. Damien's no slouch either. The actor, Cyril Raffaelli, is trained in multiple forms of martial arts. He's even the winner of numerous combat tournaments. So his fight scenes are brutal and well choreographed. The story in and of itself is told well enough, and while it's not anything award-winning, it's more than good enough to keep you invested in between the action scenes. It's a highly enjoyable fight film with some stunts that you need to see to believe. Brick Mansions is the American remake. It was released in 2014. It's set in Detroit, and it's a poor attempt at recapturing the magic of the original. It's largely the same movie, only in English and with a hip-hop soundtrack. They brought David Bell over to star in this as well, but the horrendous quick cuts and less than stellar choreography make it borderline unwatchable. While in the original you could see the fluidity of these stunts, here you can just see these little snippets of excitement and stuff that looks like it might be dangerous if you could focus on it. It's a terrible waste of Bell's talents. I imagine he took the job in the hopes of furthering his acting career over here in the US. Perhaps after this flopped, he decided he was better off just making films that he wanted to make over there, like District B13 Ultimatum. Such a shame Brick Mansions is so bad because this was Paul Walker's second to last film, and it was released after his untimely death. Both he and David Bell were fine. It was just the quick cuts, shaky cam, and other nonsense like bad attempts at 3D that made this a pale imitation of the original. District B13's on Blu-ray. It's streaming on Apple TV, and you can rent it video on demand. Taxi. No, not the TV series with Danny DeVito. This is the 1998 French action comedy. The movie's about an incompetent cop who blackmails a taxi driver into helping track down some bank robbers. On top of being funny, the movie is loaded to the brim with some insane stunts. Luc Besson came up with the idea, but he was busy with The Fifth Element at the time, so he decided to just produce and let someone else direct his script. The movie went on to be a smash hit in France. Critics were fairly kind to it, saying how it was just a big, fun, but kinda dumb action movie. Audiences loved it, and the series now has 5 entries, with the most recent one from 2018. The remake from 2004 is the same story, only it's a gang of supermodel criminals being chased by Jimmy Fallon and Queen Latifah. The original had the transforming car, but the remake had to naturally bump it up and made it just silly. While the original was exciting, the remake is stupid. Fallon and Latifah have no chemistry, and it feels like a bad Saturday Night Live skit.
Buckle up for safety, mother.
The Taxi remake did poorly with the critics, the audience, and the box office. It opened in 4th place. Variety called it embarrassing. In 2015, the movie was remade again, this time as a TV series, Taxi Brooklyn. It was a joint production between Eurocorp in France and NBC in the US. The show was a flop and was canceled after 1 season. Just stick with the original. On top of being the better version, there's 5 of them. Taxi is currently streaming on Apple TV and video on demand. It also, just as April 16th, 2024, finally got a Blu-ray release in the US. So there's 5 films you really should watch. Give these originals a shot and you won't be disappointed. Well, I hope you won't be disappointed. If you like the remakes, that's fine. Sometimes people see movies they don't know are remakes, and it stays with them. Oftentimes, a remake will lead them to checking out the original, which is also good. I'm just trying to see if I can broaden some horizons here, to get out of the comfort zone of Hollywood and look at some truly great films from elsewhere in the world. If you're tired of all the remakes and general low quality of Hollywood productions, I suggest you give some foreign movies a try.